My name is Michael Lee, product designer in the source code group, and I'm going to talk about how when I was trying to solve this issue of code owners, and there's a layout issue when it comes and gets rendered on the page, and how that might relate to too many buttons on the page. So the code owners issue, if you're not familiar with it, is this, where we have the page for a directory in the repository. When it first loads, it loads up like this, and we asynchronously look up to see whether this directory has any code owners associated to it. And when it does, we render out this block here. And as a result, it pushes the list of files down a little bit. And what ends up happening is that if someone was trying to click on the first directory or the file here, what they end up hitting is this double dot, and goes and jumps back to the parent directory. So I've seen this happen multiple times in many calls. Customers have reported it, and the question is, what do we do with this? Like, how do we solve this issue? And I'm going to jump into that in a little bit, and how that might relate to potentially reducing the number of buttons on the screens at the same time. If we first look at how our repository directory page loads up, sometimes it loads like this, and sometimes this thing's on top. So we're just going to update an issue to just lock it in to say that it's always going to be this breadcrumb with the branch selector first, with the actions at the top of the page, and then this commit information and everything else to follow. Because this area here, the dropdown, actually drives the information down here. So it makes sense that this goes on top. So cool. So we got to set that record straight. And what are we going to do about this thing here? The question here is, when you're making changes in a directory, you can't really do that. You actually need to go down to the files. So the simplest solution to this is not to display code owners at all. So if this views is protected by code owners, nothing is shown. The problem there is that, you don't know if it's protected by code owners. So what we could start to introduce is an icon. And clicking on this icon would take you to the code owners page to see the different groups or usernames associated with that level. So this is based on the assumption that knowing code owners at the directory level is not as important to know the details versus down once you're into the file itself. So this is one way to present it. Another way to present it is to use a badge. So you have code owners. I think this is a little bit more clear because the icon itself for code owners is two people. You might not know what that means. You could think it's groups. You could think of it as something else, or contributors. So calling it out as code owners might be a way to clarify what it is. Hovering over it, it says go to code owners. Clicking on that will take you to the respective code owners definition file. All right. So looking at this, I basically maxed out the top row, and this is only a very short directory structure here. But there's opportunities here to clean this up. So if we go over here, just by moving some buttons around at the top here, we can actually make more room for the breadcrumb, but also more room for informational things like code owners. So the first move I made was lock. In a Git sense, is something that I suspect is not used quite as often, because in Git, normally you don't lock files, but we have this ability. So I'm going to put that in the overflow menu over here. So lock will be under there. The history is actually something associated with this block here. So this is commits. History is a link to the commits starting from this commit point, commit entry here. So what we can do is move history down to here so that we have actions related to commits all in one area. So we move that over. So we have file, web ID, and download. Download, I'm not going to touch for now, but it can go stay in here because there's many options in there. We can think about clarifying that in the future, and potentially with code as well. So moving web IDE, or if you have a Gitpod instance, and those two options appear here. One move would be to move it into code, and that would like match up with what we're doing in merge requests, where we have checkout branch, open in web IDE, open Gitpod, so moving that into there. And that could free up some space. And that brings us to this little plus sign over here. We can move that over to here after find file as an add. So this allows you to add the directory or a file to this current directory. So we now have actions on one side, navigational areas on the top left, commit information and actions here, and then your file system here. And with that, we did all of that, and we gained some space while grouping everything together. So cool. So that's what directories look like. And if we apply something similar to files, this is what files currently look like. Let me just do that. So directory, the first iteration could be just to introduce this, and then we can, with the future goal to get to this, we can introduce this today and then work our way through separate MRs to move everything, or we can move it all in one big bang. That's going to be a group decision to see how we want to operate like that. Like I said, the other area that we can look at this after looking at how the directories was organized is by looking at the file. So this is what our file looks like here. We have a bunch of actions here, heaps of actions here, a primary call to action in between all these group button groups. So let's see if we can clean that up somehow. So what I kind of propose is potentially getting it to a state like this, where we have a simplified area on top, similar to directories over here, moving the history down, and then moving the edit button and clarifying things over here. How I actually got there is moving the history into the commit area, just like what we did with the directory. Find files stays there, blame stays there. Permalink can go into the overflow menu. These actions here, lock, replace, delete, are all file related. So lock file, replace file, delete file, they can all jump up in here in the overflow menu. That eliminates the need to have this this button group, and now we're left with two button groups. We can move the primary action button to the rightmost side to align with our pajamas guidelines, so we get something like this. Optional, we could move the download to go up here, so that aligns with the directory structure, or we could keep it in here because it's just one icon, but that is a potential move. And that gives us view as code, view as markdown, and this is copy contents, and this is open the raw file itself. What we changed here was this icon and this icon are both copied to clipboard, but they perform different things. This one copies this path, and this one copies the content inside this page. Here I changed the icon, and all these buttons actually have tooltips on them, so I think that we can differentiate the icons, and this is copy contents versus copy the path. So that's one way where we can then clean up this area here, so that our views kind of look like this. So we have our directory, our tree view, and our blob view for single file, and they almost look very similar. And I think this is a good state to get to. And working with Julia from the editor team, we can decide whether we want to move this edit button to the top for consistency. Sometimes it's good to have consistency, but if people are kind of used to having buttons in a certain area, just striving for pure consistency from a design standpoint may not be the best solution. But this is one way where we almost have a one-to-one parity of like types of buttons at the top at the directory level, and then like find file, something specific, download code, or edit. So it looks familiar, but yeah, may not be the best, may need more research, but I'm pretty confident that moving to this is a good step. And